Good morning. Looks like we'll have a nice small group to have a more intimate conversation, so don't be afraid to interrupt me with questions and try to take me off task. First of all, just so you know you're in the right spot, we've got a definition of college readiness, which is around kids are aware of their college opportunities or post-secondary opportunities, that they're eligible, they've taken the right classes, and that they're prepared. And what we're really going to focus on for this session is talking about how do we really prepare kids for life after high school. So how do we build a school system that does that? Feel good about that? You're in the right place? Free to evacuate now if you sat yourself in the wrong room. So first, who am I? My name is Paul Curtis. I am the Director of Curriculum for New Tech Network. How many of you went to New Tech High yesterday and listened to Michael Fullen speak? I was one of the founding teachers of that school back in 1996. And have kind of been with this organization for a long time. The school was up and running about 4 years when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came by and said, we love what you're doing here and we want you to share it with others. So we started a nonprofit group called New Tech Network that is helping other schools turn themselves into schools like New Tech. Not the facilities, but the practices. And I don't know if any of you are going to go on the tour tomorrow, spend some time with students, but it's a very unique model. So I really like Michael Fullen, and he has a lot of great ideas. But one of the things he said yesterday was that the school isn't the element of change, that you have to kind of go district-wide. And in that regard, I would disagree with him, because we've done it 160 times. We've taken traditional schools and turned them into 21st century learning environments. And we do it very quickly. So right now, we've got 160 schools in 25 states all across in probably every demographic you can imagine. So if you want an inner city Los Angeles school, we got a couple of those. You want a very rural Indiana school where it's the only high school in town, we got many of those. You want suburban schools or Gates and Honors kind of program schools, we've got those as well. We've got, most of these are not charters, most of these are just public high schools, some of which are public schools of choice like New Tech, where kids choose to go there even though it's a public school. And we're currently serving about 5,000 educators and getting close to 45,000 students. So we've grown an awful lot in the last 10 years in doing this work, 15 years actually in doing this work. So I want to kind of help you understand what it is that New Tech is trying to do. I'm going to do this by passing out our school success rubric so that you can see what our ambition is for a school system and what it's going to produce. And I just want you to review it. And at your tables, have a conversation and use these to keep us kind of in inquiry mode. Use these two sentence starters. I noticed that, if you want to point something out that you think is interesting, or I wonder about. Don't be afraid to break the silence.
And that culture collaborate. What I noticed is the writing. I think our students just tend to struggle with writing, and if they can't be successful in the writing process, and they're not going to be successful. I know in our district we're really trying to do writing to learn, and all the content. And so, the data shows a kid that writes 2 essays a week is more successful in college than the ones that aren't. So I noticed the writing component.
I just noticed in the college and career outcomes that
say the whole deal is having a culture of collaboration in your school. That's the most important part. People feel that because when they collaborate, that's when you see the most change and success. And then also too, Arsenio this morning about the mindset and saying that, if kids feel this way, they don't have a growth mindset, that they can, and it's the effort, it's not effort, it's changing that mindset, that all those personal qualities that you have, personal abilities can be changed in it. But if kids don't have that,
I wonder what systems they have to measure the attributes, skills, building confidence and capacity. How is it measured? Check off. Graduating class of 800.
yeah, especially when you come to advocates, you're right, because, when you create a profile of what a public schools is, we have a certain cut score. You want an ACT score, you want to fill out a FAFSA form that should be applied in our state applied Texas. But yet then you have the soft skills too that the kids need to have, which is having confidence and, doing all these other things, but then the soft skills that the kids need. Could it be a number of, to say, a kid completed 3 AP classes, or took 3 AP classes, or 2, or 1, or credit? So you're right, these are, how do you measure them?
So I hate to interrupt your conversations, but you can see that there's very little specific about how we get this done in this rubric. These are the broad aspirations, right, of where we want to be. So, for example, project-based learning is a core element of the new tech model. It's nowhere in there, in that rubric. Just like technology, like Fulham was talking about yesterday. You can't use project-based learning or technology as a driver for change. What we have to say is, here are the big goals of what we want to achieve in these students, and what is it that we need to do to get there. And there may be lots of different paths to get there. Make sense? If you were to go and visit all 160 schools, you would see them all in different places trying to get to these things. But this is the heart of new tech. This is what we want to accomplish. It isn't that we want you all to use PBL or all you want to use technology. This is our aims. And so all of our schools are working at getting those outcomes with students. If you imagine that target, this rubric is kind of a target, this is where we want to be for all students. We see lots of schools struggling to get themselves there. And oftentimes, many educators have this kind of vision if they haven't articulated it in a rubric. And I admit that new tech may be a little bit overzealous in how many rubrics we produce, but that we have this kind of in our heart of what we'd love to see in our education. I mean, I kind of wrote this thinking, what do I want my daughter to experience when she was at school? That's what I was striving for, right? So we have this idea, and yet, we're still kind of stuck down here. We haven't gotten there. And new tech, in our 15 years of work in this, has realized a couple things about that. First is that there is a hierarchy of change. Do you know Maslow's hierarchy? Right, where it says you have to have food and water before you start worrying about things like spirituality and whether or not you know what happened to the Mesopotamian War, right? So this is absolutely critical to achieve this. We educators make lots of mistakes in this area because what we try to do is we try to jump here before we've addressed these issues. These have to be in alignment. For example, if I were to give teachers a whole bunch of project-based learning professional development, and I leave them in a 45-minute period, a 45-minute period is not conducive to project-based learning. Very few teachers will stick with that approach. You've just wasted your PD time unless you change that structure. Give them more time in the class period to do PBL. Does that make sense? So at the bottom of this is purpose and mission. If you don't have a clear sense of purpose about why you're doing the work you're doing, the school will falter. And oftentimes when you talk to teachers, their sense of purpose is we have to get high test scores. That's their outcome. The school talks about test scores, tries to find these groups who aren't doing well on tests and make them do well on tests. That test scores is the outcome, not the stuff that's on that rubric, right? So, and then you've got people pointing in different directions. There are some people who, this is kind of your target, right? Some people don't believe that all kids should go to college, or not all kids can be successful, or not all kids should graduate, right? There are people, and so if you have that kind of vision and mission going on in your campus and you don't have a shared mission about where you want to go, that's going to kill you. Next, the relationships. If you're struggling on campus with politics and people fighting over monies and one department against the other department, or you've got a culture of compliance, which districts inadvertently do when they say, here's your pacing guide. We want you all to be on page 35 by June 12th, right? Whatever the date is, whatever the page number is, it's about compliance, getting every teacher to comply with a certain set of behaviors that we want to see, which then gets passed down to kids about compliance. That does not allow people to take ownership of the learning, whether it's the teacher to take ownership over the kid's success or the students to take ownership over their own success. On top of that are the policies and structures. These are the rules that govern our behavior. When these are in line to support this, you will get high student achievement. When they are not aligned, you can waste a whole bunch of money up here with this being broken, and you won't see the change you want to see. I'll give you one quick analogy. Imagine I have a group of young athletes, and they are trained all summer long to play football. We run laps, we push the sleds, we run plays all summer long, right? They are fine-tuned now, and the first game that they play in the fall is against a basketball team on a basketball court with a basketball referee. And the question is, what sport will they play? Of course they're going to play basketball. They're not going to play it well because they haven't been practicing it, but they know enough about the rules, and the referee is going to make sure that they don't carry the ball, and they're going to watch the other team score points, so they're going to make points the same way. They're going to figure out some way to play basketball. Your professional development cannot override the policies and structures and culture that you have underneath it. We talk about Congress, throw the bums out, right? You take a new person, gold-hearted, you throw them into Congress, and they will start behaving the way any congressman does because the rules are set up that way. They have to raise so much money for their campaign, they have to do this, they have to do that. The structures, not the people, are creating the problem. And you can't train beyond these lower levels. Does that resonate? Make sense? All right, second thing is we try lots of these kind of incremental adjustments to try to fine-tune our system. So our big goal is up here, and so we try to throw these little things in here. We got some kids who aren't reading well, so let's throw a Read 180 program in. And then maybe we'll try block scheduling. Yeah, that didn't really work. Let's go away from block scheduling. Or let's try small learning academies. And oh yeah, that didn't really work. We kind of go back again, right? We spend billions of dollars in education trying these innovations that are sometimes either at the top of the chain or maybe sometimes at the bottom, but aren't well aligned to what you want the goals to be. And these things just kind of putter along. And granted, education is a lot better than it was in 1960, right? We're getting more out of the kids than we've ever gotten before, but still we kind of bounce around and try to, I think of it like a Pinto, and you go, wow, let's just put some really cool rims on it. It's still a Pinto, right? You haven't changed the other elements of the machine to turn it into a Porsche. And then we go, okay, I've got rims. Maybe next year we'll add a radio. Right? Meanwhile, the rims start to rust because you didn't buy really good rims, and they start to look bad. And so we kind of stumble along on this path. So I'm going to offer you an alternative, and it's what New Tech does when we work schools. This is our trajectory. we spend quite a bit of time in planning, trying to figure out, okay, what are the things we need in place? How do we get that culture right? How do we get that shared vision and mission so we're all around the same sense of purpose? And what kind of structures do we need to put in place to make sure this can be successful? And then we do radical systemic transformational change all at once. We realign the whole system very, very quickly. Literally shut down in June, and open up in August, and you are a different school. And then after we get the transformation done, we can start that incremental stuff of getting better at doing what we're doing. How do I get better at project-based learning? How do I get better at building a positive culture, at building agency and mindset? Does that make sense? So what's in this column? Like, what do we change towards? Long blocks of time to allow for project-based learning. We train teachers in project-based learning. We're assessing 21st century skills, or 4Cs, or whatever you want to call them, those critical skills needed for post-secondary success. We are changing the culture of the school to focus on agency and building growth mindset. We have internships and portfolios. These all happen at once. And it happens in an aligned and integrated way so that the different parts aren't fighting each other. We're basically giving the school a new machine. Here's a new ecosystem for you to operate in. These are the new parameters. And it's very hard for teachers to go back. And very few teachers want to. Teachers want to teach this way. When they envision themselves as a teacher, they didn't envision themselves as, going to pacing guides and having kids sit and listen to their lectures or do workshops or sit in front of a computer with headphones on for 8 hours. That's not what they envisioned. They envisioned engaging, meaningful, rigorous curriculum, right? So most teachers come right along with us. They see this vision as well, especially if they go visit a new tech school. So what does all this align to? And this gets to the question of assessment. How do we teach and assess the knowledge, skills, and attributes needed for college, career, and civic life in a world of rapidly advancing technology, structural shifts in our economy, and a shrinking globe? That's our big driving question that aligns all of our work. And to give some context to this, I'll show you this little graph. This is a graph of what happened to the number of people working in the agriculture industry after the tractor was invented. 90% of us used to be farmers, and now it's less than 3. Where did all those people go? Education. I wish. Where did they go? They left the farms and went to factories, right? They went to the coasts. They went to Michigan, Detroit to build cars. They had to reinvent their world. They couldn't be farmers anymore. There wasn't enough jobs. The combine could do the work of 200 men, so the other 199 had to leave, right? Went to the coasts. So this is today's factory. Yeah? Where are those workers going to go? Right? Google has a car that can drive itself. Right? What happens to all those taxi drivers in New York when Google starts selling cars that drive themselves 24/7 without a person behind the wheel? Right? When the robots can flip burgers. Basically, if a robot can do your work, it will soon replace you. Right? That's the bottom line. And you guys have heard the story about Watson? The IBM computer they built to compete on Jeopardy? And it actually beat their 2 top ever winners. Right? We are busy training kids to be calculators in our math classes. Humans will never, ever beat a computer at calculations. A computer cannot write a formula, but in solving the answer for that formula, a computer will always beat a human, every single time. A human cannot compete against massive amounts of data and finding obscure answers buried in an encyclopedia. A human cannot compete there. We're hearing about, they took this computer and filled it with a bunch of medical data, and now they can put in data about your health and symptoms you're having, and the computer will give you back the feedback on, and it's more accurate than doctors are, because no doctor can keep up with all the journals they're reading, all the journals that are being produced, right? Data overload, we can't handle it, but computers can. So the question is, what is it that humans can need to do to be successful in a world where this is our reality? Knowledge, skills, and attributes, what are they? So let's think about this. I'm going to give you a little bit of time at your table. I'm going to fill in the knowledge one because we kind of have that listed in our standards, right, of what the core content should be. But at your tables, pick a secretary, and I want you to brainstorm what do you think the skills are that you think kids need to have, and also the attributes. And you can draw on the stuff that Mr. Fullen said yesterday and what you heard this morning in the session on mindset. What are the skills and attributes? All right? Give you 5 minutes to create a list.
Skills they have, they're gonna be communicating. They need to be able to write. Tech savvy, I don't know how we would say that.
How you doing? This is the rubric we use to measure success in our schools. Just gives you a sense of what new tech is about.
Attributes they need to have, thinkers. I'm thinking skill is like, not so, I think it's more qualitative here, and this one is more, they have to write, they have to communicate. Tech savvy, problem solvers, perseverability, flexible. You said open-minded? Did you put communicate? I'll put that under skill. Listeners?
Let's see if you can set a goal for getting 10 of each. 10 of each. And you guys can't just talk about it, you have to write down. See if you can get 10.
Skill would be technology, my sheet.
No.
I have them all right here.
Yeah. No, you can't.
Tech savvy?
Writers, communicators, tech savvy, they need to be readers, they need to.
Break it down and get the 10.
Where's motivation?
Communication could be written.
Yeah, I put
Synthesizers
communicate.
of knowledge, what would that be?
A skill.
Give you another minute. This is the brainstorming phase. You don't have to be accurate.
Steal from them again. Well, we already said analyzers. You need to organize.
Let me give you a couple ideas. You could come up with all sorts of different lists and different words to describe these, but in general, this is probably the kind of stuff you were putting down, right? You pull a group of educators or business leaders together, they tend to write down very much the same attributes. Things like collaboration are at the top of the list for most employers right now. They're craving people who can do effective collaboration. And then we've got those attributes, which this morning's conversation was about, right? And it's, you know, so much research being done here about a person's success in life based on these attributes. We've kind of clumped them all together and labeled them agency, that we want the student to be an agent for their own success. And so these are those attributes that allow them to be an agent for their own success. Again, probably lots of wordsmithing you could do in that section, but this core idea is that if you aren't assessing, teaching and assessing these things along with this, then you are not preparing students for the world that they will face. It is not enough for us to continue testing math and physics and chemistry without also making sure we're getting these skills imparted on our students. Yes?
When you say assessing, do you mean assessing summatively or formatively?
Both. Both. And really, a great quote around summative assessment was, it's all formative until you die. Right? Okay, so that big list is too much for us to distill into a set of outcomes we can really target for teaching and assessing. So here's how we kind of distilled that list into knowledge and thinking, and this brings in the critical thinking skills, problem solving. What we found, and we tried for many years, is to assess critical thinking separately from content is nearly impossible. That, you know, we tried to say, well, devoid of all content, let's just see how well that student thinks. It's nearly impossible to do any thoughtful assessment around that. So we combine those two, knowledge and thinking. This is the content and how well you think about that content. And by the way, I can share these slides with you if you don't want to take a bunch of notes. Written communication, oral communication, collaboration, and agency. So those are our core set of foundational outcomes that we impart on every school. Now, every school that we work with. Now, they may add their own. They may be, a school for arts and build in an artistic element, or an engineering school and they build an engineering element. But these are kind of the foundational outcomes that we want students to be taught and measured against. So, yeah, sure.
Why separate written and oral?
Because of how we do the assessment on them. That obviously communication is a broad skill we want, but when you're doing assessment, they're two very different rubrics. So we've got a rubric for written communication and a rubric for oral communication. So it's very easy for us to bifurcate those, even though they're all kind of under that big header of communication. And we also know that some kids are really good at, getting up in front of a group and spewing what they think, and it's a very different when you get to this written communication, especially around Common Core or rigorous academic standards that really are quite a bit separate than the public speaking skills, comfort talking to others, and presenting. So we have a formula for how we get kids to those set of outcomes. And it starts with culture. We call it a professional culture of trust, respect, and responsibility, but this is where we establish that growth mindset. And when you come onto one of our campuses that's doing well, the culture feels somewhere between a university and a young upstart company. That's kind of the culture we're going for. We don't have bells, we don't have hall passes. The idea being that what we're trying to do is to promote the students' ownership of their own learning. And it's less around compliance, and it's more around a shared understanding of what our expectations are. And so you'll see, even without using the language, you'll see in our schools a lot of the restorative justice approaches. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but the last time I heard at New Tech, they had, in nearly 20 years of being open, have had one fight. Kids report that they can leave their backpacks out, their computers out, they can leave their phones out in that big center cafe area, and they don't get stolen. This is a sense of community that is established by our processes. So culture, again, on that Maslow's hierarchy, is near the bottom, right? So number 2 is project-based learning. Even though it's not in the rubric, we believe that project-based learning and the brothers and sisters of project-based learning, which are problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, and like for math, we use problems instead of projects. And also in math, we use facilitated assessment lessons because we feel those are better. But there's still that kind of student-centered, inquiry-based approach to education. So we believe this is the way you hook kids into the learning because it makes it interesting. And second, this is the only way we can get to those other skills like collaboration, communication, time management, that if you continue to have a teacher-centered classroom that's very structured, and here's the handouts due at the end of the period, you will never get to those professional skills. So PBL is the next one. Let me talk just a very little bit about PBL, and I don't know how much experience you have with it, but this concept of that what you're learning is what real life is going to be is at the heart of this. And so if you're getting your driver's test, when you're practicing how to parallel park, it is a lot like what your test will be like, which is exactly how you'll experience it when you're trying to park your car. That the practice, testing, and what happens in life are well aligned, which is often not the case in our classrooms, where the kids that the work that students do in the classroom often looks nothing at all like the work they'll do when they graduate, let alone go to college. But post-college, it's even, college isn't even very representative of what work is like in real life. And so getting these aligned is at the kind of core of PBL. So a lot of people think they're doing PBL, and really they're doing projects. And there's a very important difference here. People who do projects think this way: I got to teach a bunch of content before the kids can do the project. And so I run them through my traditional course materials, and then I throw this kind of fun, cool piece of dessert at the end of this unit to try to make it more engaging, right? So first of all, it's not project-based learning because they're not using the project to teach. They're busy teaching in their traditional ways and then throwing a project at the end. Secondly, oftentimes teachers and kids are very disappointed with the results of this project. It's usually kind of this thing thrown at the end that kind of feels fun. Kids like it better than this, so they don't complain. But usually when they take their project home, it's like throw it in the dumpster. They really don't care about it. There's no real meaning for it. And you ask them, what did you learn that project? I don't know, right? So, but this is what a lot of teachers are doing when they think they're doing projects. What New Tech means by doing projects is you twist this all around and you say this project launches the whole unit. I'm going to throw you into a really complex challenge, a problem that you won't be able to solve unless you do a bunch of research and work and figure out how to make it happen. And then, by the way, at the end, I'm going to make you present in front of community members who are going to ask you really tough questions about your product. Right? That's how a PBL unit works. And so you've got a lot of the same activities with workshops and quizzes and lectures and homework. I mean, those are all embedded in there, but they're all tied to solving this bigger problem that students have to do. And that's the core element of project-based learning. And we don't say you do this once in a while. We don't say you do it in some classes but not others. We believe that this is how people learn best. Give them a significant challenge, give them lots of support and scaffolding to solve that challenge, and then make a real outcome at the end that's meaningful. Right? It's not a once in a while thing. In fact, one of the big mistakes principals will say is, we're going to do a bunch of PD development, and then what I'd like you to do is everyone should do one project. You never get good at PBL doing one project. It's going to be a mess, it's going to be a disaster, you'll be exhausted. I'm not doing that again. Right? This is how we teach. Now, we may not get there the first year, having 100% wall-to-wall PBL, but basically that's where we're headed. Make sense? And again, interrupt me if you have questions, because we're a nice small group here. Feeling okay so far? Doesn't feel like I've rocked your boat too much? All right.
How often are they doing those presentations?
So a typical project will last 3 to 4 weeks. It's kind of there's longer and shorter, but typical. So if you have 4 or 5 classes, you're probably doing one a week. And then sometimes they bunch up right towards the end of the semester, just like finals. Right? Yeah. So again, you can see where if you're the only teacher on campus doing project-based learning, you have to teach them all of this stuff. How to do presentations, how to manage your time, how to work in groups, where to store your content, how to use it, right? It's exhausting. If everyone on campus is doing this as well, if you have a shared vision and a shared sense of purpose, remember that hierarchy, then this becomes a light lift, because in every class that kid takes, he's getting little bits and pieces of this that are helping him develop those skills. One of the challenges with doing project-based learning is it's sometimes really hard to understand what kid A knows, right? You kind of know what the group knows because they do their presentation, but how do I really raise the rigor on that individual to really demonstrate what he knows? And so we've been working to create these things that we call IAKTs or IACs. We can't figure out a good way to pronounce this thing. So, but they're individual assessments of knowledge and thinking, right? So that within this set of tasks, there is one thing, maybe it's one of the big benchmarks, where the kid has to sit down and write something really academically rigorous in the middle of this project. It's tied to the project, so it has all the context and the richness that we want to see, but now we're looking for that real strong academic college readiness skill set. So we've been working with two groups to get this done. The first group is the Literacy Design Collaborative. They've got, essentially are these templates, these prompts, and they've got, I don't know, there may be 30 or so of them, but they're tied to Common Core. And so if you're in Common Core and you say, oh, I want to have my students practice doing informational essays or explanatory essays, well, they give you a prompt, and they give you maybe 3 or 4 different types of prompts. And basically, as a teacher, you can, once you get a little bit of training, you figure out how to write really good prompts that are tied to Common Core, which are also tied to college and career readiness, right? And so this is an example of a prompt and what it would turn into. You see how that works? And so it makes it very easy for us to train teachers to write good prompts that are tied to Common Core. And so the teachers look at these prompts, pick out which prompt they're going to use, and then just fill it in. And then this is what the kids respond to. So writing the prompt is stage number 1. Partner number 2 is Scale, which is a group out of Stanford who is helping us come up with how do you assess this in a way that could have the same kind of legitimacy as an SAT. How do we describe what a successful paper looks like for college readiness? And so they've helped us develop our knowledge and thinking rubrics. And we've got them for a whole bunch of different subjects. So picture math, history, science, language arts, at each of the different grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And the idea being that these are tools that we can use to calibrate teachers on what we mean by college readiness. So in the field of science, in the category of argumentation, this is what we would be looking for in a student performance. So, yeah.
I have a question. Like all of these districts that are in the new tech network, do you provide this information for them? Do they have to buy in? Like, do they purchase this separate? How does it work?
So when you elect to become a new tech network and say, yes, we're ready to do this, we have a whole process of transformation, and it comes with all of our materials and resources, including a learning management system, which is designed all around supporting project-based learning.
Is that the ECHO system?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this one I handed out was 12th grade.
Yeah.
There's another one for 8th grade, and another one for 5th grade. So it's basically elementary, middle, and high.
Okay. It's like a 10, may have the same as a 12.
Correct. So this is not about assigning a kid a grade, A, B, C, or D. This is about mapping where they are on this trajectory towards college readiness. So a freshman might score kind of low on this, but it still might be an A paper in the class because they're on the trajectory. Does that make sense? So there's a difference between grades that we assess and clearly articulating what the goals are we want the kid to ultimately be able to do. Good.
Do you have a system that keeps track of how they progress over time?
We're a little too early for having that kind of system that tracks that. We're really trying to get good at this process, even understanding what these are. I'll let you play with that in a few seconds here, a little bit in more depth. But so again, the first 2 ingredients were culture and PBL, and so the third ingredient are these individual assessments of knowledge and thinking. And When you put those three together, this is what we believe is our winning formula for getting us to college and career ready. That you have to have that culture that creates a growth mindset. And when I mean college ready, I mean college ready for all kids, not just some kids, right? You have to have that culture that makes them want to learn. You have to have PBL that engages them in meaningful, rigorous work. And you have to have some sort of way to hold them accountable to rigorous academic standards.
So IAKT stands for what again?
Individual assessment of knowledge and thinking. Just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? We'll pay $10,000 to anyone who comes up with a really good acronym for all this. Icky cat, yeah, that works too. So just to give you a sense of our learning management system, this is the grade page that a teacher or that a student would see when they look at their grade for a class. This happens to be American Studies, and it's actually an integration between US history and an arts class. So when a kid turns a paper into us, a research paper, maybe it's one of these individual assessments, they're going to get a grade in the knowledge and thinking. They're going to get a grade in how well it was written for written communication. And they also might get points in their agency category for doing their best work.
So what shows up on the GP, on the college, the transcript? Just the B plus then?
Oops, sorry. Right? One of the things we focus on in New Tech is we've got a sphere of influence, what we can change and what we can't change. Right. There are some progressive universities that do accept alternative things like portfolios for assessment, and so kids can leverage that. And when they write their essay about what they're good at, what they're not good at, they're drawing on this kind of data. But I'll tell you, if you asked any employer what kind of grades what would you like to see? And I'll tell you, as a teacher too, the student, let's say this student right here is a pretty good student, right? Works really hard, but is struggling down here in oral communication, right? That teacher, he's a B plus student. He comes to me and says, Mr. Curtis, I wanted to get an A. How do I get an A? And I was, in a traditional grade, it'd be like, you just got to work harder. You can do it. I know you can, right? But this tells them exactly where they need to work, right? And a great story we had from New Tech was there was a bunch of adults on campus who were being led around by students, and the adults asked the student, well, why did you volunteer to do tours? Why are you doing this? And the student said, well, my oral presentation skills weren't too good, and so I decided to volunteer for this to get some practice. That is ownership, right? That is agency. But if we don't give them the right data, if our categories are homework, tests, and papers, participation, right? Those aren't real outcomes. Those are things that you do to get to outcomes. These are the outcomes we're trying to measure, right? So again, it's about alignment. You have the right culture in place, you build the right structures, you build the right tools, you have this right pedagogy, you're transforming the school in a significant way, holistically, very quickly. Let's do a little practice here. So Linda Darling Hammond, I like this quote because she says it so simply that basically if you want to improve the practice of teaching, then engage them in rigorous analysis of student work. And so what I'd like you, I'm going to pass out this project report for a high school biology class. And the task that the kids had to do was create or make a recommendation on what type of grapes to plant in this vineyard after looking at soil samples and the local pests and other conditions. And this is for a freshman biology class. So this is one of the individual assessments of knowledge and thinking that the kids had to do. And what I'd like you to do is to use the rubric I gave you earlier to assess this paper. And you are free to talk and communicate.
Is this just for one kid? Was this for a group?
This is one student. Remember, these are individual assessments, right? All the ICATs, the icky cats, are individual assessments.
The kids could collaborate within their group in order to determine like what they were going to say? Or?
In the big project, they all collaborated and they all did a big presentation together. But each student had to sit down and write their own analysis of how they got there. See if you can get to consensus on the rubric on where the student scores. Oops. Don't be afraid to break the silence.
Yeah. I mean, and then it's worth just testing whether or not there's a bit of stuff that the same thing. Yeah, some specialised, but the more disciplines. Yes, they have them more. That's why the limited in which I'm not sure that I found it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read all the way through it, but I haven't seen that either.
Yeah. Logic, clear, consistent with complex ideas, communicate, yeah. Can't find any new evidence more the presentation is all this, isn't it? This one I struggle here. I'm sorry, the research one, yeah, they've listed sources, but what happens is such a high number of stuff. This one goes on, this one goes on, this one goes on, this one goes on. Synthesis, yeah, they come to some conclusions there.
This is a ninth grader.
Without any evidence in this field.
I don't know, I was thinking under attributes, students demonstrating capacity to be self-directed and making choices that will affect their current and future success and seeking rights.
This is the rubric we wanted you to look at.
Oh,
This is the science rubric for high school.
we're having fun with this one.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's why I'm giving you a course correction. That when assessing these types of work,
Yeah.
we're using these rubrics.
Okay.
And that one.
Or were you thinking it was
Communication is there.
Seem to send out a thesis and they support the thesis and
That's what the scientific method, hypothesis, research, trial, more research.
seems to me
Feel free to jump up here if you want to participate in conversation. You don't have to be isolated. Looks like Rick's trying to solve budget problems over there.
so I'm trying to, it's hard to where I don't get in there, but it's very,
A lot of academic.
it's got a few too many commas in the wrong place, but.
Yeah. Paragraph not intended, sorry.
Yeah,
The other one on advanced, it says, knowledge is in response to questions.
says, it isn't why we didn't choose the Cabernet Sauvignon. She says because da da da. And she takes it out, and now it goes to Chardonnay and Merlot. And now here's the thing, based on, she says, soil, flea beetle. And then she goes to the next one, you know, the water cycle. I'm trying to think if that's a counterclaim.
Yeah, I'm more on developing and then occasionally bouncing back to the delivery. Just because
But it's when you come to here, yes, it
That she has the counterclaims.
So is that an unanswered question, or are they giving some kind of information?
Yeah, she's not on the evidence, she doesn't believe that there are differences in law. Right, yeah. I'm gonna go with college ready Here's good paper.
Okay, it just feels like you guys are heating up in conversation. I hate to cut you off, but I'm not going to be the one that stands between you and your lunch. But you start to get a sense here, right, of this document is supposed to meant to describe an emerging scientist, right? And as you read that paper, do you start to see an emerging scientist coming out, right? This I would never use to put a grade in the grade book, right? I would use this rubric is too much for a freshman to be able to get an A. They would never get there, right? But as teachers, I can now sit down and look at student work. This is one of the best ways of doing professional development, and go, what do I need to do differently for the next project to improve elements that are missing? How do I help kids get good at this? Because what I really want them to be is emerging scientists, right? And these conversations not only happen between teachers as they're looking at student work, but also you let students sit down and do peer evaluations throughout the process. This isn't the first time the kid wrote the paper. It went through several iterations to get to where it is, right? Which is key. Iterating work is how we progress. So I'm going to show you a video of a teacher who's talking about her experience using these individual assessments. And you're going to, because our schools are all over the country and our coaches are also all over the country, that occasionally the best way to have a conversation is doing it through video. So we've got her on the screen, and then there's two coaches down here who are interacting with her and debriefing her experience. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Let's see.
And yet, you're grading 108 ethics, and it's hard. And I'm not going to say that it's not, because I'm a science teacher, and it's very difficult to, one, take time out from my content. And I'm a chemistry teacher, so I got a lot of content. And it's very hard for me to take time out of my content to teach writing skills, argument skills, and then give them time to write in class, and then give them time to revise each other's papers in class, and then give them time to look at, the rubric and all the rest of this. And as a science teacher, I will tell you honestly that at the beginning of this, I said, oh no, I don't have time for this. I have too much content, and I don't want to do it. But I will tell you that after I looked at the results from my third period class and realized that they actually understand the content better than the kids that I did not waste all of that time teaching them how to do argument and evidence, I thought, oh, I wonder if all of this time that I have been spending on content has been doing the opposite of what I wanted to do, which was And so it teaches content through this onerous process of writing because you have to make sense of it in order to really write about it. They do know the content better and they have better recollection as well. They have better recall of that information than any of the other periods do. So I am a science teacher. I was very resistant to this at first. I'm going to totally own that. But I will also tell you, I'm a convert. I really am. This is a fantastic way to teach content. Don't love grading essays. I hate grading essays.
So again, it's this trifecta: building this positive culture, PBL to provide the engagement in 21st century skills, and then building in these rigorous, kind of academically rigorous papers is for us, we believe, going to be a winning formula for how we get there. You could assign these papers without the PBL, but then you miss the richness of the context of this kid making sense of it and really owning it. It becomes then just regurgitative research paper, right? So you have to provide that context of a question that has no direct answer. There could be maybe 5 different varietals that would have worked in that vineyard situation. And the fact that there is no single correct answer and they have to defend it, right, makes this a rich and meaningful project. Okay, officially I'm done. Is there any questions? More information available here. I can also give you a card if you want to dig deeper into something.
We
Yeah.
can get your slides by going to the New Tech Network.